I bought a house for my parents, but they gave it away to my sister. When I found out, I stopped making mortgage payments, and the house was eventually sold. I'm a 28-year-old man, and for years, I had been paying the mortgage on a home I purchased for my parents, only to later discover they had gifted it to my 25-year-old sister without even telling me. I always knew they favored her, but I never imagined it would go this far. My parents' devotion to my sister is almost obsessive, while their feelings for me barely exist. As the eldest, I was expected to be responsible, while my younger sister, Perry, was treated like royalty. Not literally, since we weren't wealthy, but she was always free to do as she pleased. Unlike me, she had no academic pressure. She got to pursue her passions and hobbies, while I was pushed into relentless studying. My parents were never subtle about their expectations. They made it crystal clear that I had to excel in school and build a successful career. After high school, they took out loans and used up their savings to put me through tech school. I suggested they co-sign an education loan instead, and I'd repay it once I got a job, but they refused, citing high interest rates. They warned me that I'd end up paying 1.5 times the original amount. At 18, I didn't fully grasp how loans worked, so I trusted their judgment. Little did I know, they weren't saving me from debt. They were just setting me up for future exploitation. After college, I landed a great job, just as they had hoped. They were proud, but I always felt more like an investment than a son, something they had put money into, expecting a return. They constantly reminded me, "We sacrificed so much for you. Don't forget your roots. Don't forget where you came from." At first, I thought they just wanted to keep me grounded, but over time, I realized it was manipulation. Guilt tripping was their specialty. Once I started earning, the pressure intensified. Every time I visited home, my dad would drop hints about how he had drained his savings for my education and how I needed to repay that sacrifice. They had always dreamed of owning a home, but since they spent their savings on my college, they expected me to buy one for them. I was barely a year into my career when I visited home for a vacation. During dinner, my father looked me in the eye and said, "We did our part by funding your education. Now it's your turn. You should start planning to buy us a house. We can't live in a rental forever, can we?" I felt my stomach drop. I knew they wanted me to buy them a house, but not this soon. I was still sharing an apartment with 2 roommates because I couldn't afford a place on my own. And yet, here they were, expecting me to take on such a massive financial burden. I pushed back. "Dad, I just started working. I can't even afford my own apartment. How can you expect me to buy a house?" His response was casual, as if he had merely planted a seed. "I'm not saying right away, just that you should plan and work toward it." Then my mom, her voice laced with artificial sweetness, added, "We put you through college. Without us, you wouldn't be where you are today. Think of it as paying us back." I couldn't bring myself to argue. They weren't entirely wrong. I owed my success to their sacrifices. But sometimes, their constant reminders became unbearable, and I wanted to scream, "Who asked you to do this for me?" Still, I never had the courage to talk back. Instead, I kept my distance, only responding to their calls and texts when absolutely necessary. After that dinner table conversation, visiting them was no longer an option. I used my demanding job as an excuse to stay away. But no matter how much I tried to avoid them, the expectation of buying them a house never left my mind. It lingered like a weight I couldn't shake off. So after 5 years of relentless saving and hard work, I finally gave in. I bought them a home, a simple but comfortable place in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't luxurious, but it was more than enough. At the time, I thought it was the least I could do to repay them. For 3 years, I diligently made the mortgage payments, even paying extra to close it sooner. I had other plans for my life. I wanted to buy my own place, travel, and eventually start a family. I couldn't afford to be stuck with this loan forever. Once they had the house, their constant nagging finally stopped. They proudly flaunted it to friends and relatives, boasting that their investment in me had paid off. I didn't care about that. What bothered me was that despite everything, the emotional distance between us remained. I still avoided going home, keeping our relationship as minimal as possible. Then, 2 days ago, I decided to visit for the first time in months. Work had been overwhelming, and I thought it would be nice to surprise them. But when I pulled into the driveway, I was the one in for a shock. Perry's car was parked outside. At first, I felt a small sense of joy, thinking she was visiting too. It had been years since I last saw her, Her wedding was the last time we were in the same place. I knocked on the door, and to my surprise, Perry answered, dressed in her pajamas. I assumed she was just staying over. We exchanged a quick hug before she casually asked, "Hey, what are you doing here?" I chuckled. I could ask you the same thing. Stepping inside, I looked around and asked, "Where are Mom and Dad?" She flopped onto the couch and replied nonchalantly, "Oh, they moved out." I froze. "What do you mean they moved? This is their house." Perry shrugged like it was nothing. "Oops, guess they forgot to tell you. They gave it to me. I live here now." My stomach dropped. "They gave you the house? The one I've been paying for?" "Yeah," she said, completely unbothered. "Mom and Dad thought I needed it more. You know, I'm planning on having a baby soon, so they figured I should have it." I stood there in stunned silence. I forced out, "Where are they living now?" "Oh, they're renting an apartment across town." She said it like it was the most normal thing in the world. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked out, my mind spinning, my blood boiling. I drove straight to their new apartment, not caring that I was about to show up unannounced. When my mom opened the door, I didn't wait. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded. "Perry just told me you gave her the house." "The house I bought. The house I've been paying for." "Care to explain?" My mom had the audacity to smile, as if this was just a minor misunderstanding. "Calm down, honey. Come inside. We didn't think you'd mind." I stepped in, but I didn't sit. I wasn't here to chat. I wanted answers. My voice rose without me even realizing it. "Didn't think I'd mind? You gave away the house I bought for you without even telling me. How could you possibly think that wasn't important enough to mention?" She sighed, as if I was the unreasonable one. "Well, since you're doing so well, we figured it wouldn't be a big deal. Perry's planning on having a baby now. Do you really want your niece or nephew to be born in a rented place? Do you want them growing up in an unstable household? Now that they have the house, they don't have to worry about rent. They can focus on their child's well-being." That was it. I lost it. I don't care where my niece or nephew is born and raised. We lived in a rented place. I still live in a rented place. And it's not my responsibility to provide for Perry's family. That's on her and her husband. If they want stability, tell her to get a better job. The argument drew my dad out of his room. He looked annoyed as he asked, "What's all this fuss about?" Mom jumped in before I could answer. "Perry needs financial security, and we have to provide it. She didn't get the same opportunities as you. We didn't pay for her college, so she deserves this house." I stared at them in disbelief. "You didn't pay for her college because she never went to college. She dropped out of high school, remember?" But they weren't hearing me. They just kept repeating the same nonsense. "You're successful. You can always buy another house." "Yeah, I will. But it sure as hell won't be for them." I couldn't take any more. My mind was spinning, my chest was tight, and I just walked out. I didn't even know where I was driving, just away from them. Eventually, I checked into a hotel and have been here ever since, trying to process everything. That all happened on Friday. Today is Sunday. My return flight is on Tuesday. At first, I wanted to book the earliest flight out, but once I calmed down, I realized I had a few loose ends to tie up before leaving. For one, I needed to check how much of the mortgage was left. I'd been making extra payments, so I was probably ahead of schedule. Before my visit, I had asked Dad about it, and he said he needed to check with his loan manager. I texted him earlier, telling him to take me to the bank tomorrow. I want the full details. As for the mortgage itself, there's no way in hell I'm continuing to pay it. Not after this. My parents and sister have already taken advantage of me enough. This is where it stops. It's just a matter of how to handle it now. I know they can't afford the payments. And Perry? There's no way she'll be able to take over the loan. It's going to get messy. But I refuse to be the fool in this story any longer. Update 1. There's more to this nightmare. My hands are literally shaking as I type this. We just got back from the bank, and what I found out nearly knocked the air out of my lungs. The extra payments I had been sending, the ones I scrimped and saved for, living frugally so I could pay off their mortgage faster? Yeah, those never made it to the bank. My father had only been paying the bare minimum, the required mortgage amount. The extra money? He used it for their own expenses, specifically to pay rent for their apartment. The apartment they moved into after giving away the house I bought. Can you believe that? How awful is this? When the bank manager showed me the records of monthly deposits, I immediately told him there had to be a mistake. We had been paying more, nearly 1 1/3 times the mortgage amount. I even pulled up my transaction history on my phone, showing exactly how much I had been sending my father every single month. Then my dad, calm as ever, looked at me and said, "The records are correct. Let's discuss this later." I felt like I had been sucker punched. My stomach dropped. My head spun. Another betrayal. I barely processed the rest of the meeting as the manager walked us through our remaining mortgage balance and some loan restructuring options. I just sat there in a daze, my world unraveling. When the manager finally left, my father pulled me aside. His voice was firm but hushed. "Why are we talking about the extra money? Did you send it for the mortgage?" I snapped. "Hell yeah. Why else would I send you extra money?" And that's when he dropped the bomb. "I thought you sent it for our expenses. I used it to pay our rent." I just stared at him, stunned, completely speechless. I dropped into a chair, burying my head in my hands. What do I even do with these people? My father sat beside me, his voice lowering. "Don't make a scene. It's not a big deal." That was it. I flipped. "Not a big deal? You pressured me into buying a house for you. Then you gave it away to Perry without even telling me. And now, I find out you've been pocketing the extra mortgage payments? And you think this is not a big deal?" My father isn't the type of man to take criticism lightly, especially not from his own son, and definitely not in public. He snapped back immediately. "Don't you dare raise your voice at me. You didn't do me any favor by buying that house. I wiped out my savings to pay for your college. I don't owe you an explanation for what I do with that house. You send the money, I pay the mortgage on time. So what if I use the extra money for rent? It's not like we're asking for more." I saw red. The extra money was to pay off the mortgage sooner, not to fund your new apartment. And I walked out. As I made my way to the subway station, I could hear my father screaming my name behind me. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking. My mom has since called 4 or 5 times. She even texted, saying, "Come home so we can sit and discuss this." I didn't respond. I don't want to discuss anything. I've made up my mind. This is the end of the line. Enough of their toxicity. First off, sorry about the spelling and grammar in my last update. I was shaking with anger when I wrote it. I had to go back and edit it later just to make it readable. I also didn't get around to answering some common questions from the comments, so let me clear those up first. A lot of people asked if my parents are Asian. No, we're not. Let me bust that myth right now. Asians aren't the only ones with parents who push their kids to the extreme. This kind of entitlement isn't exclusive to any one culture. And as for who the borrower was, the mortgage was under my father's name. I never co-signed it because I had plans, buying a car, maybe even a house in a few years, and I didn't want my future tied to that loan. Looking back, I couldn't be prouder of that decision. It made what I did next so much easier. Now for the real update. After that bank fiasco, I went back to my life like nothing had happened. The days passed, then the weeks. And when the first of the month rolled around, I didn't send my father the mortgage payment. As expected, he tried to reach me, only to find out, surprise, surprise, he was blocked. Not just him. My mother, my sister, her husband. Every single one of them. I wasn't about to let them drag me back into their mess. I made my decision. I stopped paying the mortgage. If they wanted to give the house to Perry, fine. Let her pay for it. Let her deal with the consequences. It wasn't my problem anymore. And then, chaos. The unknown numbers started rolling in. Voicemails. Texts. Desperate, angry, panicked. Probably their friends' phones. Maybe even a new number they got just to reach me. "You can't just stop paying. We don't have the money to cover the mortgage." I read the messages. I laughed. I sighed. Well, that's not my problem anymore. Blocked. Every last one of them. But that wasn't the end. 3 days later, I came home from work and found him waiting at my door. My father. He was furious. His face red with anger, fists clenched, breathing like he'd run a marathon just to get there. "You can't just walk away like this," he barked. "You owe us. We put you through college. We made you who you are." I didn't hesitate. I didn't even let him finish. "I've already paid you back. Do you even realize how much I've spent on that mortgage? It's more than what you paid for my college tuition. I don't owe you anything." He sputtered, eyes burning, ready to throw every guilt trip in the book at me. Ungrateful. I cut him off. "No, you don't get to guilt trip me anymore. I've done enough. I'm not paying for the house, the rent, or anything else. You made your choice. Now deal with it. You treated me like a commodity, an investment you expected to profit from. But guess what? I'm not a damn commodity." I stepped inside. I shut the door. And I locked it. Let them figure it out. I stormed out of the hallway, got in my car, and drove off. There was no way I was stepping into my apartment with him still lurking around. He would have just followed me inside, dragging the drama even further. I wasn't ready for that. When I finally came back later that night, he was gone. Mom, on the other hand, didn't give up so easily. She kept calling, leaving desperate voicemails, trying to wear me down. Even Perry decided to chime in, leaving a long-winded message about how she needed the house for her future family and how I was being selfish for not helping out. Selfish. Me. The one who had been paying for everything while she sat around doing nothing. I didn't give in. Not to their guilt trips, not to their manipulations. I was done. I had poured my hard-earned money into buying them that house. And in return, I got nothing but entitlement and name-calling. Update 3. The house was sold at auction. Perry was forced to move out. As I said before, she couldn't afford the mortgage, and my parents were already struggling just to keep up with their apartment rent. The moment I stopped covering the payments, it was only a matter of time before reality caught up with them. It took almost a year, but I finally heard that the house had been sold. My parents tried everything to save it. They drained their savings, liquidated part of their retirement fund, anything to keep Perry's dream house afloat. But it wasn't enough. And that's when things got ugly between them. When the financial strain became unbearable, my parents asked Perry and her husband to cover at least 50% of the mortgage. And what did Perry do? She flat out refused. She insisted that the house was a gift to her and that it wasn't her responsibility, it was theirs. That was the moment my parents finally woke up to the mess they had created. But by then, it was already too late. In the end, letting the bank auction the house was the smartest decision they could have made. At least that way, they managed to recover a decent chunk of money, the down payment, and all the payments I had been making for years. Of course, I know it's my money, but I don't expect a penny back. I've already made my peace with it. I know they won't give it to me, and honestly, I've let it go. The way I see it, I've more than repaid whatever they spent on my college tuition, with interest. And now, I don't feel even a shred of guilt for cutting them off. From what I've heard through family, my parents have downsized to a smaller apartment to ease their financial burden. The money from the auction? They've tucked it away for retirement. And here's the kicker. They've been telling everyone that they don't want to rely on me in their old age, that they're securing their own future instead. And Perry? She's finally on her own. For the first time in her life, my parents have cut off her financial support. She, of course, tried her usual guilt tripping, claiming that since they paid for my education and secured my future, they owed her the same. But this time, my parents didn't budge. They've finally come to their senses, and they're not falling for it anymore. Well, good for them. In the meantime, I've moved into my own apartment, a place that's mine and mine alone. For the first time in years, I finally have privacy, peace, and the freedom to make my own choices without being weighed down by constant demands. It feels liberating. I've also started saving to buy my own home, one that belongs only to me, a place where I don't have to worry about anyone taking advantage of my hard work. Walking away from family isn't easy. It never is. But sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who take advantage of you the worst. It took me a long time to accept that, but now that I have, I don't regret my decision. Family or not, I deserve better than being treated like a walking bank account. It's heartbreaking to see how everything unraveled, but at least now, my parents and Perry are finally facing the consequences of their actions. And as for me, I've learned some hard lessons, but I'm in a better place now. That's what truly matters.